Space is quite vast.
We're receiving a signal.
On audio, Lieutenant.
Oh my God, it's full of stars.
Doc, you built a time machine out of a DeLorean?
Prepare ship for ludicrous speed.
Into the limitless boundaries of space.
It's in the name of science.
Absolutely marvelous.
The latest result in machine intelligence.
God creates dinosaurs. God destroys dinosaurs. God creates man. Man destroys God. Man creates dinosaurs. I am your father. The podcast from Planet
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the podcast from Planet X. My name is Ben, and with me, as always, today is my co-host, David.
How's it going, guys?
This episode, we are covering. I don't remember what year it was released. I should have written that down. But we're covering K-PAX. I think it's like 2001 or something like that.
Yeah, I think so.
So K-PAX, I don't know. It's a very interesting. We're gonna get into the synopsis first, and then we'll talk about our initial thoughts. So the synopsis for this movie, K-PAX tells the story of a mysterious patient, played by Kevin Spacey, at a mental hospital who claims to be from a distant planet called K-PAX. As his psychiatrist, Jeff Bridges, tries to figure out exactly how to help the patient, he gradually begins to realize that the so-called alien is having a remarkable effect on the mental health of the hospital's other patients. So, I'll let you get into your thoughts first before I launch into mine.
Alrighty, so as the movie in itself, I didn't appreciate it like I should have in my youth, because I just felt like it was a really stupid, boring movie. But I don't know what it is, but I really, really do like this movie. It touches so many different aspects, and whether you believe him or not, it leaves you guessing the entire time. I mean, like, It seems to me that there's overwhelming evidence that supports one answer to that question: is he from another planet or not? And we can get into that later. But I could also see where people would say other things and say the opposite. So, I mean, it's open to interpretation. I don't see any clear argument on that side of things. But maybe
this is I don't want to say it's as ambiguous as the Blade Runner ending, but it's definitely got some clear ambiguity as far as the ending goes. Just like Blade Runner did.
Yeah.
I did like the movie at the end, but this movie was a little bit of a slog for me to get through, I think. When they finally really get into the nitty-gritty, like when they're in the a scene when they're in the what is that? The astronomy building, whatever, the museum or whatever they're in, where he maps out the orbit of K-PAX and then all of the surrounding planets and celestial bodies and stuff. That's when it started to get super interesting to me, because I was like, okay, this definitely gives credence to the theory that he is an alien, which is kind of the whole point of, this being a sci-fi movie.
Mm-hmm.
But up until that point, they had kind of touched on it, but it was more about them trying to pin some sort of mental illness on him rather than trying to try and figure out what he's all about, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, they were definitely convinced that there was absolutely no truth to his story whatsoever. He's mentally ill, and there's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And they had small hints, bits and pieces throughout the first few moments before that the planetarium or whatever it was that before that scene. Like the ultraviolet light thing and that one medicine. I guess it was supposed to be a sedative or something that didn't work on him at all, even at an extremely high dose. But that also could be that could be explained away in other ways too, mutations in DNA and things like that. I mean,
exactly, yeah.
And then I think some also could say that maybe it just had something to do with his glasses. I mean, maybe that's why he could see ultraviolet light. But I'd agree with you. It was a little bit slow in the beginning. But I also kind of knew where it was going, so it wasn't so much of a slog for me. But I could see where you'd get that impression, because it does take a bit.
Because we're covering it on this podcast, it is a sci-fi movie, so I kind of figured that it would have something to do with the fact that he's an alien. But it was still a little bit slow for my taste as far as that's concerned. It's definitely a little bit different to the first two movies we've covered on this podcast, because this didn't have any action whatsoever. It was all like very slow and dramatic, and which it was a nice change of pace as far as that's concerned, but it definitely did make the movie a little bit harder to sit through for me.
Probably why I kept asking you if you'd finished it. You hadn't yet.
Yeah, I watched like the first half hour one day, and then I think right before the day we were supposed to record this the first time or something, I watched like the rest of it. I was like, okay, I gotta get this done. Let's just do it. So
it's
But
understandable.
I did by the end I did enjoy it, and I did enjoy doing the research on it, as I've said with the other two movies that we've covered so far. So, with that out of the way, we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. We're going to talk about some of the people behind the film first, and we'll talk about some production stuff and themes and whatnot. So, as we said in the synopsis, Kevin Spacey played the not titular because he's not named K-PAX. He played the main dude, which is his name is Prout, I believe, is, if I'm remembering it right. That's how you pronounce it.
Yes.
Kevin Spacey also played Frank Underwood in House of Cards. He played Doc in Baby Driver. He played Mickey Rosa in 21 and Lex Luthor in Superman Returns. And I think we'd be a little bit remiss if we didn't address the accusations of sexual misconduct that's happened over the many years of his career. He was charged with a felony in December of 2018 for allegedly sexually assaulting journalist Heather Unruh's 18-year-old son in July of 2016. But the charges were dropped in the middle of last year. So right now he hasn't been formally charged with anything, but I'm on, I don't know. As much as I enjoyed the guy's acting, I'm kind of inclined to believe the victims in this one than side with him.
Yeah, I almost didn't want to do this movie just because of that. But then I was like, well, if we go down that road, then there's a lot of crap that we're not going to be able to cover if we shy away from it because of incidents or alleged incidents such as this. So I'm willing to just gloss over it and leave it as it is, just so that the movie itself or any other productions that he's in that I actually like to watch, I'm not going to let all that ruin it.
We don't want to say gloss over it. We're just going to let it be.
Yes,
we've addressed it. We've addressed it. Neither of us agree with it, but that doesn't mean that it needs to take away from the movie
exactly
as a whole.
Exactly.
So yeah, next we've got Jeff Bridges, who played the main doctor psychiatrist. He played Kevin Flynn / Clue in Tron Legacy, and I also realized that he was in the original Tron as well. He was Rooster Cogburn in True Grit, the Dude in The Big Lebowski, and Charles Howard in Seabiscuit. And then this director, Ian, I'm not going to know how to pronounce this name. It's Ian, which I'm going to assume is pronounced Ian, maybe? Ian Softly, who I don't think I'm like 95% sure I haven't seen any of his other movies. He directed the horror film The Skeleton Key. He directed the Anglo-German independent drama film Backbeat. He directed a crime film called Hackers, and he directed a romantic comedy film, The Wings of the Dove. So he's got like, just right there, that's like, including this movie, that's like 5 different genres that he's dabbled in directing.
Yeah.
Which is pretty interesting.
None of which I've seen or heard before, so.
Yeah. I think this is the second movie we've covered where I haven't known what the director is known for, which isn't a bad thing. It just means, we haven't seen it. Maybe we'll get to it eventually. I don't know what other things he's directed, so.
Exactly.
So there was while I was researching, I found a little interesting production thing. There was a plagiarism controversy that happened after this movie came out. So if you want to touch on that, David.
Oh, so I don't understand why I've never heard of this if I like this movie so much. But there was an Argentinian director, Eliso Subella, or something like that, claimed that K-PAX plagiarized his 1986 film, Man Facing Southeast. I've yet to ever hear about this movie, and I even went looking for it after I saw that, and it's like, I don't know whoever saw this. Never once have I ever
I think it's a Spanish language movie.
It must be. That would make sense if it was an Argentinian director. But I've never heard of it before in my life, so if it is, I've not seen it. I couldn't tell you. Maybe one day we'll investigate that and actually watch it ourselves, but
yeah,
it's not one of those movies I've ever heard of before, so whatever. He then also sued Gene Brewer, the author. Brower. Why do you have an R in there?
What are you talking about? It's Brower.
Oh, okay.
Brower.
I thought you said Power. My bad. The author of the book the movie was based on, and many others connected with the film. The lawsuit was dropped as the trial kept getting stretched out, and Subella no longer had the funds to continue. No surprise there. He claimed to his death that K-PAX plagiarized his movie, so I guess that'll be the end of that, unless somebody in his estate can continue the claims, but at this point I'd say it's water under the bridge.
It doesn't really sound like that's the case, honestly.
No.
Yeah, I don't know. We'll have to investigate that in the future if we can ever find the movie, find like a translated version or one with subtitles or something, so we can actually investigate those claims. But I thought it was pretty interesting because, I mean, this seems like a fairly, I don't know. It seems like a pretty original movie to me. I don't think I've ever seen anything quite like K-PAX before. So it could very well be that it plagiarized this movie, but it could also be that, this was just some dude that wanted to get a payout and didn't. So I don't know.
Who knows? Anything's possible nowadays.
Okay, so there's a few different themes that are pretty prevalent throughout the movie that I wanted to touch on. The first one, which is family. They mention family a lot throughout this movie. Mark Mark Powell, which is the dude that Jeff Bridges played, he asked Prout about family. I don't know. It's definitely more than once. I didn't get a count on exactly how many times he asked Prout about family on K-PAX.
No less than, I would say, no less than 2 of the sessions that they had, but probably closer to 3 or 4. It was definitely a stick with him. He wanted to know, and he didn't listen very well because Prout answered him the first time, and that didn't stop him from asking again and again. So
No, well, it's understandable because he's like, well, there's no way that somebody that a society can function without a family, at least the way that we think about it.
yeah, exactly.
So, I think we as humans have a hard time trusting people per se. So it's like, why would I let my child just roam around and learn from the people in my community when I don't know the people in my community,
Yeah.
So I think in that way, as far as this movie is concerned, K-PAX, at least the way that Prout explained it, K-PAX is maybe a little bit more advanced socially in that way than we are, because even though they don't have the family dynamic, they also don't really have to worry about oh, what if my kid gets kidnapped by this person that I don't know in my neighborhood.
Yeah.
So it's interesting because you can see Mark's dynamic with his family throughout the movie. Like he has a really tough relationship with his wife and also his son from, it was his son from his first marriage, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So he apparently he hasn't talked to his son for
quite some time.
Years. Yeah. So it's Mark asking Prout about family, I think, is his own way of trying to be like, of trying to understand how maybe he can live without a family, but in answering how K-PAX lives without families, Prout also answers why humans need families. He gives Mark reasons as to why he should repair things with his wife and talk to his kid and everything like that. So it's interesting how this being that has no familial ties whatsoever, how he is able to like kind of sort of repair the relationship that Mark has with his family.
Yeah, I really like the trying to think of how to word this. I really like the dynamic that Prout created in the family just by the visit that occurred during the 4th of July.
Yeah.
And the conversation that he had with Mrs. Powell, I'm assuming, and all that. Just that really opened up a lot, and also gave more insight into how it seems Mark doesn't seem to listen as much as he should, even to his own wife. And I also found it very interesting how a person who supposedly has no familial ties whatsoever could instinctively pick up the concept of pushing a child in a swing set and instantly having that connection, even though it was for a very brief moment. I found that very interesting too, and I think that would be one of the stronger arguments to saying that he is not a being from another planet. There's a lot of previous learned experience that he exhibits.
Well, we'll get into this.
He claims
we'll get into this in the next section.
Yeah,
but it's
fun.
hard to say whether it's because he isn't an alien and he's just some, crazy dude that lost his memory and now he's got himself wrapped up in this whole uh backstory that he's created for himself, or if Prout really is an alien and he's taken over his friend's body so that he can get him some help.
Yeah.
So, like I said, we'll get into this more. We'll explain exactly what I mean by that more in the next section because it's a little bit hard to get into
Yeah.
without some backstory. But yeah, we'll see. So the next big theme throughout the movie is light. Light is mentioned as the method of travel, as to which Prout travels around. Apparently, I really like the the scene in the planetarium or whatever it was where they ask him to demonstrate light travel, and he just stands there. He's like, "Oh, I'm here." And he goes,
Adios.
"Adios, aloha,"
Mm-hmm.
and he just stands still. That was good. That was definitely a nice moment of comedic relief.
Yes.
So it's interesting the way that they use light because, as David mentioned before, it's found out that Prout can see ultraviolet light. So using that information, Powell darkens the room that he interviews Prout in so that Prout will finally take off the sunglasses that he's been wearing all movie.
Yep.
And then they use light different ways throughout the movie. Like they light that the room that he gets hypnotized in pretty interestingly with the like water background behind them, and I don't know. They did some really interesting things as far as actually using light goes in the movie,
And
like when framing people and stuff.
The framing of people, almost any quote special effect that was used was a light of some sort, or maybe a lens flare panning around in a camera or something like that. Almost anything that they did special effects related, if anything at all, always centered around light. The scenes, the transitions, and everything that they did with the subtle background music that they had going on, it all focused on light. So they definitely pushed it hard.
Yeah, I don't know. The way that they use light in this movie is very interesting, and the fact that it kind of factors into how Prout travels around is a pretty interesting concept too. So last little point as far as the theme goes, the film is not, in spite of being a sci-fi movie, the film is not about aliens or Prout. The film is about Mark Powell's relationship to his family, which we touched on in the first point here. But I want to kind of get more into it because it's interesting to think about the movie in that way, even though we spend probably about half of our time with both of the characters. You can definitely tell, because we spend that time at home with Powell, we're supposed to be more focusing on him than we are necessarily supposed to be focusing on Prout, even though the main mystery of the movie is Prout an alien or is he just a crazy person? As far as the movie is concerned, as far as the like actual emotional plot line is concerned, I would say Mark Powell is the main protagonist in the movie.
I could see where you'd want to say that. But that also somewhat takes away from a lot of the achievements or miracles that seem to only happen because Prout has had his hands in it. As far as what the patient outlooks go inside the ward, because there's
Yeah.
multiple instances where their behaviors change for the better, or even exhibit symptoms of being cured, somehow magically being over OCD, or magically being over a huge case of germophobia or something like that. I could definitely see where Mark is definitely going to be the main character, but that shouldn't take away from the things that Prout did do.
No, no, no. I thought it was an interesting point to make that even though Mark is supposed to be kind of the secondary character, that he can also be considered a main character as far as one aspect of the story goes.
Yeah.
Okay, so onto our final segment. I'll let David take this one. We're going to talk about the ambiguity of the ending, which we've touched on a few times here, and whether or not we think Prout is an alien or not.
Alrighty, so the ending leaves us wondering whether Prout is alien or not. And a couple of arguments that could be said for him being human is his human subconscious. The things that were revealed specifically through the hypnosis treatments. There was 2 or 3 sessions that were done under hypnosis, if I could speak tonight, that would indicate that he has had a human-led history on Earth for a very long time. Unfortunately, what Dr. Powell is believing that the whole Prout persona is just mass. I don't know how to word this. It's due to trauma. It's a massive trauma response due to the fact that his wife and daughter were murdered, and it just so happens to coincide with the same timing as Prout's arrival. Now, he could also be an alien, and some of the arguments for that is the ultraviolet rays that he says he can see, and apparently a test did prove that he could. Some of that could be through his glasses, we're not sure. His astounding knowledge of astronomy, physics, and advanced psychology. The fact that he was able to cure certain patients of their mental illnesses. The fact that he was able to draw in the planetarium or whatever it was exactly, the orbits, as Ben had mentioned, almost exactly as they expected to be. And once the professors, for lack of a better word, the PhD nerds in this instance, had calculated for the, I guess there was a missing variable that they didn't quite understand, that Prout provided an answer for. And once they accounted for that, their calculations that they typed in based on what he had said made a computer-generated model of the exact same orbital patterns that he had drawn. So he's either a huge astronomy nerd that has somehow gotten a conk on the head and is lost. And that was even a joke in the movie at some point. You don't have any missing astrologists anywhere. Or he's he's got some secondhand knowledge that nobody should have. And they even question him, how do you know this? And his response was, well, that's common knowledge on K-PAX. All K-PAXians know that. It's common knowledge as your children knowing that the Earth revolves around the sun. And I was like, well, you can't argue with that. No. I think the biggest thing, at least for the ending, that would indicate that something has gone on is the fact that there's a huge electrical disturbance on the surveillance tapes as he's, quote, leaving or departing on the morning that he said he would be going back to K-PAX. But there's also a couple of segments in the movie in the middle where he's managed to disappear. I don't understand this. For 3 days, he's gone. Nobody can find him. He's completely escaped this. I think it was the Manhattan Psychiatric Hospital that he was supposed to be at. So he's just run amok for 3 whole days, and nobody knows where he's at. And then, just as magically as he disappeared, he reappears, and it's like, oh, well, there he is. So I thought that was fun. And this is, I think, the biggest. This is the biggest question of what happened to somebody else. Where did Bess go? There's a patient named Bess who has been mute this entire basically the entire movie.
Yeah.
And she's uttered a couple of words to Prout, of all people, of course. And the explanation that we're given is that there was a house fire when she was little, and I think she was the only survivor.
Yeah.
And that's obviously left her pretty traumatized.
I think they said that she doesn't want to speak because she thinks that smoke will start coming out of her mouth.
Oh, yes. That is right. I remember. Good point on that. And of course, if anybody can hear it, we apologize. He's got trains going on in the background, and oddly enough, I've got the opposite of trains, but what might sound like a train. Really bad storms going on outside, so hopefully we don't have any problems with that. But anyways, she disappears, and earlier in the film, Prout has given a couple of different people different tasks, and has promised that one of the patients would be able to go back to K-PAX with him when he left. Well, the morning that he leaves, she's gone. She disappears just like he did for the 3 days, except she never comes back. So, I guess the argument could be made. He either taught her how to get through security without being noticed, because obviously he's successfully done it for 3 days, or he took her with her. And I guess we can have a discussion on that, but
yeah,
it's just amazing.
So
do you want to do
I
these
think
next 2 bullet points?
Sure, yeah. So if we're believing that Prout is an extraterrestrial and could travel through a light beam in human body physical form, the reason why Prout's body is still left over is because he can only take one physical person at a time. So he takes Bess, but Robert Porter's body was left behind. The reason Robert Porter's body is left behind is because Prout took it over to try and get it to somebody that might be able to finally help him get over the trauma of his wife and child being murdered. Not necessarily in front of his eyes, but pretty darn close.
Close enough. I mean, he found the killer. It's still there.
So, I think now would be a good time to kind of touch on all that, because we haven't really talked about it a lot. So throughout the movie, Powell is trying to figure out some sort of human background for Prout, and he finds this guy, Robert Powell, through just Prout explaining different things while he's under hypnosis. Robert Powell supposedly was a childhood friend of Prout's, that Prout would go visit every once in a while, while he was a kid on K-PAX. So apparently what would happen is Robert would be in trouble. He would call out to Prout, and then Prout would come back to try and, just hang out with his friend and figure out exactly what's going on. So this last time that he sees Robert, we find out that Robert has walked in on a murderer that not only raped his wife, but killed his wife and killed his daughter as well. And Robert, understandingly very, very enraged by this, just completely goes crazy and snaps the man's neck.
Yeah.
So he's distraught not only by not having a family anymore, but by having committed this murder, which arguably he's completely in the clear of. I would say that, but you have to imagine what that's doing to a man's psyche. So he calls out to Prout, and Prout gets there just in time to see Robert jump into the river that's behind his house. Powell goes and talks to the local sheriff down there later, and we do find out eventually that that Robert's body was never found, which is pretty obvious considering Prout is inhabiting Robert's body, or Prout is Robert, depending on what you want to believe.
Exactly.
That's kind of where the big division is, because you could see it either way. If Prout is just an extraterrestrial being with not necessarily a human physical form, then it is very conceivable that when Robert jumps into the river, Prout, I don't know if he would take over right away, because I mean when Prout leaves, Robert is catatonic, so you would have to assume that something happened, but Prout at some point takes over Robert's body and just inhabits it, supposedly to try and get it to somebody that could help Robert. Now you can believe that, or you can believe that that Prout is Robert, and that this whole Prout persona is just some coping mechanism that Robert has come up with to deal with the fact that he does not have a family anymore, which also makes sense because Prout has said multiple times to Powell that family is not a thing on K-PAX.
Exactly.
So it's conceivable that the fact that K-PAX doesn't have any families and the fact that Robert no longer has a family is intertwined, which is pretty interesting to think about.
Excuse me. So what is your thought exactly? What camp do you live on with this?
I'm more inclined to believe that Prout is an alien. Not just because this is a sci-fi podcast and it would be kind of weird for us to cover it if I didn't believe that, but I don't know. I feel like there's pretty overwhelming evidence that there's definitely something extraterrestrial going on with Prout. So I don't know. I'm definitely more inclined to believe that he's an alien.
See, if there wasn't so much evidence and there wasn't so much supporting reasons as to why he could be an extraterrestrial, I would say that this entire thing would just have to be an altered personality due to the trauma faced. Either could be physical trauma from he did jump in the river. He could have suffered a massive concussion and been knocked out for an unknown period of time. They did say they could never find his body, and at that point they just assumed that he had drowned or something like that, and he was long gone dead. But there's just too much that has been brought up in the movie to suggest that he is not, at least Prout is not an extraterrestrial. I think he's just beamed into his body this entire time, got him the help he needed, and then beamed back with Bess, is my personal belief on it, because of just all the evidence, mostly the scientific evidence, the ultraviolet light, the extensive knowledge of the astronomy patterns of a constellation in a planetary system that hardly anybody knows anything about. It's 1,000 light years away, and they're just now beginning to understand it themselves. There's only a few elite scientists that even know about it. How would he know all that, being the person that he is?
Exactly.
I don't know how Robert Porter could have this knowledge at all. So that's where I think it has to be Prout. Just beamed to him. Now, the catatonic state is what's got me really intrigued. I'm wondering, is this a result of mental trauma, emotional trauma, or is it pure physical? Is there something physically wrong with him? Is this a side effect of Prout being there in his head, for lack of a better word, for 5 years since this incident? I don't understand that part. But hey, you could have always made a K-PAX 2, and then we could have had the answers. But
well, there's a K-PAX 2 book.
Oh, is there?
Yeah,
might have to read that.
Yeah, I don't know. It's hard to say the reasoning for the catatonic state just because they don't really touch on it at all. But I'm more inclined to believe that it's probably something more to do with an emotional sort of thing, because otherwise, I'm not saying that Prout is a medical genius, right? But otherwise, why would he go to seek psychiatric help instead of going to seek medical help?
That is a good point. If he seems to have all the answers, and it makes it seem like he does.
Mm-hmm.
If it was physical, then why not get himself sent to an intensive rehab facility?
Yeah, exactly.
Physical rehab and stuff like that. So that's a good point to suggest that it is mentally linked and not physically. I mean, the trauma itself, I think, is just all mental. I don't even think there is any physical trauma with that aspect.
Yeah, no.
It doesn't seem to have any other issues besides the fact that he was found unconscious. And that's the first physical thing that is wrong with him this entire movie, is when they finally do get to his room after all the surveillance equipment magically goes to snow, for a back of a letter word. He's just under the bed, completely paralyzed, in a catatonic state. That's the first physical indication there's anything wrong with him. So I think it's just because Prout's gone, and it's all mental now.
Yeah. Okay, I think that's it for the talking points that we have. So for the rating, out of 5 beams of light, what do you give it?
I was gonna say light beams, but same difference. For the movie, okay, I'm gonna have to split this up into 2. The movie itself, as far as the watchability, the pacing, the lack of action, all of that, I'd say a 2.
Okay.
Now, the actual entertainment value for those who would actually see the value in it, being able to think about this and having an intellectual thought or a moment to go back, maybe rewatch it, pick up more things, and piece together a lot more clues, I would say it's probably a 4 out of 5. Overall, I guess you could call it a 3, but I like the movie. The movie itself it's not a hit, guys. It is not a blockbuster hit. It is not going to knock your socks off if you're looking for that. But if you're looking for something to think about, give it a 4.
I think I'm just going to grade it as a whole package. I think I'm going to sit kind of where you were, right around a 3.
Gotcha. Okay.
I like you said, it's not a blockbuster movie. It's a very slow, introspective movie. But if you're into a slow, introspective movie, it's good. It is enjoyable as far as that goes. So,
Yeah.
I think as far as I think it's especially just like the two movies we've covered before. I think this is a movie where if you haven't seen it, it's worth it to go check it out.
I would
Wouldn't you say?
so. Yeah. And
Yeah.
if you have seen it, obviously let us know your thoughts. And
Yes.
we can have discussion about that as well. Is he an ET? Is he not an ET? Some of your supporting arguments for said decision that you came to. I feel like this one's ripe. This is like Blade Runner. This is ripe for debate as to what
Yeah.
could be. It could be either way, honestly. So I think that would be a good one. I just like that it's a nice change of pace. I mean, you've got sci-fi movies that are like, hold on to the seat of your pants. It never stops from moment to end, like Terminator or things like that. And then you've got those that have their really good moments, and then there's some slow parts, and it's just the right dose of entertainment at the right time. And then you got these sci-fi movies where it's all thought based. So I like it. It's a nice change of pace.
Yeah. All right, that is where we're gonna leave this one, guys. Thank you so much for listening. Be sure to leave a rating on whatever podcasting platform you're listening to, and tweet it at us. We are at Planet X Pod on Twitter. And yeah, be sure to let us know what you thought of the episode, and if you've seen the movie before, what you thought of the movie. And until next time, bye.
Bye, guys.
Thank you for listening to this episode of the podcast from Planet X. We are hosted, edited, and produced by Ben Mason, and co-hosted by David Knowles. Our theme song is produced by the Tormented Teamster. You can follow Ben on Twitter at Ben Plays Vidjas, that's Ben Plays VIDYAS, and you can follow David on Twitter at Car6x16. If you want to keep the conversation going, you can contact the show on Twitter at PlanetXPod or by email at podcastfromplanetx@gmail.com. That's all for this episode. We'll see you next time.